Welcome back to Beyond Mobility, where we explore the systems, services, and stories that support independence, accessibility, and quality of life. Today, I am excited to be joined by my friend Stephen Beard, who specializes in accessible home buying. Housing plays such a huge role in long-term independence, safety, and stability, yet it's an area that's not often talked about or overlooked. Stephen brings valuable insight into the accessible home buying world, barriers that people face, and how thoughtful planning can make meaningful difference. So, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. Can you share a little bit about your background and how you got into, specializing in accessible home buying?
Well, Brianna, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. I got into real estate sales, residential housing resales, more than 21 years ago. And as a person with cerebral palsy, I felt previously underserved by real estate agents who were perfectly awesome agents, but really didn't know anything about mobility challenges. Now, I'm not a wheelchair user. I use a cane, and I have some balance issues, but I wanted to be able to serve a community that didn't really have a champion. And I'm grateful I've been able to do that now for more than 2 decades and really help make a difference for families around accessibility and housing and home ownership.
Oh, I love that so much. Um, when someone with a disability or mobility need begins this home buying process, what are some of the biggest challenges or misconceptions that you see early on?
Well, first of all, obviously money. Everybody in the country, we all struggle with affordability of home ownership. Prices have gone up, even in communities where we thought were kind of immune to that, coastal effect of high home prices. We see prices going up in these popular urban areas, especially. And so we have to overcome that. And there are sometimes financing options for people with disabilities and their families to tap into. The other biggest misconception so there's two big misconceptions. The first one is that everybody who uses a wheelchair has the same mobility issues. It's a complete misunderstanding, and it extends into transportation, where you're a specialist, and also into other areas where you see someone with a wheelchair, and if they're in a wheelchair, especially a manual chair pushed by a third party, immediately they're not intelligent. You should be talking to the pusher, not to the person in the chair, because they obviously don't know anything because they're sitting in a chair being pushed. So there's that kind of misconception. There's bias and misunderstanding of disability. But from a home ownership perspective, two different people are going to use their chair and their mobility in different ways to use different parts of the house. For some people who use wheelchairs, they want hard surface flooring like hardwood or tiling or something that they can move around their chair in. But for others, they want to have a carpeted area so they can scoot around. Maybe they have a kind of disability where they can scoot around with their upper body strength. And so we really want to customize searching solutions to where the needs are. So that's misconception number one, that a ramp solves all problems. A ramp and a grab bar do not solve all problems. That's number one. Number two is that not all most homes are not accessible to begin with. There's a perception out there that if somebody like myself is a disability specialist realtor, then I must be able to find all those homes out there, or even apartments, that are accessible. And the sad truth is, in built up communities especially, homes are not adequately accessible. I only find 1 in 50 or 1 in 100, something really crazy like that, that is already going to work for my client. Almost always my client needs to make modifications. I represented a buyer recently, and I was excited to show them a house because it was fully ramped, and it had a chairlift to the second level. And I said, okay, it's got some accessibility features. Not a good fit for them. Due to the nature of the disability and their needs, it wasn't going to work. So we must be cognizant of the fact that, especially in built-up urban areas, the housing stock isn't supporting us. And quite frankly, although strides have been made in housing stock and housing development and new construction in the last 20 years to make property more accessible in some parts of the country, it's still a fraction of where the need is at. And so very often we need buyers who are not only financially capable of affording the house, but are financially capable of putting more money in after they buy it to make it work, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, in my personal experience, that's what I've seen. A few years back, I did look into buying a home, and it just came down to the budget that I had. There was nothing on the market that would fit that. Even if I bought the house for a cheaper price, there was still so many more adjustments that need to be made and adaptations. So I absolutely agree with that, with what you were saying. So, how important is planning, especially for individuals whose mobility needs may change over time? And what are some of the features that they should prioritize from the start?
Okay, so putting aside financial planning, just
Right.
putting that aside for a minute, we want our clients to be thinking about location in a broader perspective than the typical home buyer might do so. And what I'm talking about is many of our clients get services to support their disability condition,
Hmm.
their condition. Now, those services may be government provided and they may be on certain finance supports through agencies of state or federal or even local government.
Hmm.
But sometimes they're private pay services, whatever those services are. And I'm not just talking about services that come into the home. I'm also talking about services in the community. So I want my clients to be thinking about that as broadly as possible and as early as possible, because it will change the geography of the search, right? And the second variable is when we are looking at communities where to live, and we're talking about long-term planning here,
Hmm.
if there is the ability to do it, can we think about in communities that have been designed a little more intentionally,
Hmm.
where it's not just individual homes that have adequate accessibility, but the whole neighborhood does. And very little progress. I've not seen a ton of progress on this. I had a podcast of my own a few years ago, and I interviewed some folks from Idaho with their independent living movement who are working really hard with developers in Idaho to bring a community orientation to accessible housing.
Hmm.
Um, I think we need a lot more of that. We need developers who are building tract developments to be thinking about the accessibility of the entire neighborhood, not just 1 and 3 houses designed for the senior that's on a ranch style with a clubhouse that's accessible because ADA says it has to be. But what about you can make friends with the neighboring kids, right? You're an 8-year old, you use a chair, or you're significantly physically challenged, and you want to go play with your buddy next door. You never can go in his house. Is that what this means? So I broader, more inclusive thinking about development and community, I think is warranted.
I agree. Um, so just kind of rolling off of what you were saying, what are your thoughts on universal design, and do you ever see that being a standard for like future homes? Obviously, we can't really go back and fix the homes that have already been standing for a while, but do you ever see future builds just kind of having that more universal design to where everyone can get in the house at one point in time, no matter if it's a neighbor or the homeowner or etc.?
Well, I'm a big fan of universal design principles, and there are some nonprofits that are doing a lot of great work in this area. However, I can't speak. My view of it is very much like peering through a microscope at very specific things. It's like uh, I can
Hmm.
see, if you had a cloth, right? And you could peer through a little pinhole in one part of the cloth, and you see a little view, and you peer at another part of the cloth, you see a different view. I don't have a broad
Yeah.
perspective on what's going on around the whole country around this. I
Hmm.
am a big fan. I think we should move more. I think in the 20 years I've been in business, and I'm in the Bay Area of California, so there's a strong disability culture and disability rights movement that here. So I don't even think I think I'm in a bit of of a unique environment that is maybe further along than other environments and other parts of the country where that history and legacy isn't there. So all I can say about this is I have seen progress in a good way in the last 25 years around how we build single family homes and how we build multi-unit apartment buildings, and a general higher level of awareness in my circles around the need to think about these things. But I don't know how universal that is. I would love to see a national standard like we have for energy efficient homes. Some people have talked about that. I think we're a long, 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 long way from that right now. I think, in fact, the perspective and priorities of people seem to have changed. So, but on the broad scale, I think we've come a long way, at least from my corner.
I would have to agree. I would have to agree. And I think that your answer is really logical and realistic, right? We have to be mindful of that we do want these changes, but we have to accept that until those changes are made, what are we going to do in the meantime, right? To make sure that people are getting those homes or staying independent. So, what advice would you give to someone who feels overwhelmed or a little unsure about navigating the home buying process with that accessibility piece in mind?
Well, first of all, buying a home is overwhelming, even if you're not dealing with the accessibility challenge. It's a big deal. I love what I do because I get to have conversations about this issue all the time. If somebody listening to this is feeling overwhelmed, please call me. Reach out to me at the contact information you have. I'm happy to have a conversation about this any day of the week, except maybe Saturdays, but most days of the week, right? I would encourage people to not to, when they look at the overwhelm, to work with a professional, an agent like me, and maybe even a family member who has experience with housing, and break it down and take baby steps. Okay. Instead of looking at the end result, the final outcome, look at what is the best thing you could do today or this week that will move you forward on this path and get you to where you want to get.
I love that answer. I love it. And one last question. How can industry professionals like realtors, builders, lenders, people like that, how can they better collaborate to improve access to accessibility housing?
Well, I think there's an education piece. I've had the pleasure and privilege to speak to realtor groups and to other groups about accessibility in housing many times, and I hope to continue to have those opportunities. I think podcasts like yours are a good kind of way for us to bring education to the forefront. Conferences where these sort of matters are discussed. There's some really good nonprofit agencies that put on events that and there are. Um, I don't know to what extent some of the major industry groups are cross collaborating, but that sort of thing would help. I think a lot. Professionals, in my experience, when professionals collaborate across industry or at least across platform within an industry, everyone can benefit. And we take away good ideas and we make the wheel a little bit better than it was before.
Oh gosh, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and helping shed some light on this important topic of accessible home buying. Conversations like this really remind us that accessibility doesn't stop with transportation, and it really does extend to all the places where people live, grow, and build their lives. And thank you to our listeners who are tuning in. If today's conversation sparked questions or ideas around accessible housing, we encourage you to continue the conversation and seek out to resources that support safe, independent living, such as Stephen and his team. So until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and keep moving forward.